Welcome to our last Bookachino Live event of the year, which is sort of like a Book Reporter Talks To as well. I don't know. Austin and I have these two things merging together for our last program for the year. Let's put it that way. Where I'm going to be talking about my 44 bets on selections, books that I've picked throughout the year that I think are books I'm betting that you're going to love. And we've written about these on the site, but I want to do a little bit of conversation about them as the end of the year is here. And do I still think they're bets on? And guess what? I do, about all 44 of them. Now, we're going to be looking at the categories of fiction, historical fiction, thrillers, and memoir. And it's fun for us to look back on this because Austin and I realized as we're pulling this program together today that we've interviewed 38 of these 44 authors for Book Reporter Talks To interviews during the year. And it was fun for us to, as we were working on this, to reminisce about what we talked to them about during those interviews, as well as what I read on the page. So our fabulous producer, Austin Rue, is going to be on the screen today. He's going to step out from behind the camera to do a little bit of conversation with me about these books. So, Austin, where are we going to begin?
Well, why don't we start with fiction, because that's what people seem to like. We will start with two books that both take place over the course of 24 hours. Why don't we start with that?
Take place over the course of 24 hours and decades. And I'm really interested that I haven't seen anywhere in the media anybody writing about these two books. We're doing somewhat the same kind of contrite that's happening within them. So we're going to start with one of my favorite books of the year, which is The Paper Palace. And The Paper Palace is set on Cape Cod, but it's not the one with the beautiful beaches that I'm always thinking about. It's not the one with the sandy soil. It's the other side where there are ponds and there are little areas where people have come to live for generations. And the Paper Palace is referring to the place where the Bishop family lives, which is not very chic. In fact, it's not chic at all. It's kind of run down. It's a place that they go back to every year, and they've got great memories of all being together. So how does this place take place over 24 hours and a couple of decades? Well, we've got the one day that happens at this house, 24 hours that breaks down of what happens there, including the very explosive beginning when our protagonist goes outside of the place where she's having dinner with her father, her mother, and her family, and has sex with her childhood boyfriend. This is a guy she's known for years and years and years. They have never come together like this. And then she walks back into the house and starts assessing what has happened in her life for the next 23 hours and what she's going to do and what is going to happen from there. And it takes us back in time about the bond between these two, as well as her relationship with her husband and her children, and where she's coming to the end of the book, which is probably one of the propulsive things that I've ever seen, because you're moved like to try to figure out kind of what happens. And Austin, we were talking to her, wasn't she talking about those last couple of pages?
Yeah, well, there was something that was brought up in the video that had a lot of people talking. I'll leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that. And what was really interesting is I read this book with my book club, and the last 3 pages, you cannot read ahead. But I will also share that the author said that in the last 3 pages, she didn't know what she was going to do until she got to that point. So it's not like she was writing to a conclusion. She was coming up with it on the spot as well, which was really interesting. And then when we met with our book club, 2 people saw one ending of the book and the other 6 saw something different. And we've heard this over and over from people who have read the book. So there you've got The Paper Palace, for one that's 24 hours and a number of decades behind to figure out where they came to this point that day.
For the other book that was 24 hours, we have another beach that we're going to. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so now we head out to Malibu, and we have Malibu Rising, trying to get this not big glittery, by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this book actually, it's kind of funny. The book takes place in the 80s, yet this was the #1 historical fiction book in the Goodreads recent contest, the reader contest. So I just want you to know that the 80s are now historical. I've never thought of them that way. Either that or I'm feeling really super old at this point, but it takes place in the 80s, and that's what's known as historical fiction. So here we've got the Riva family, we've got the Riva kids, and this is going to take place the day that they're having their really big party. And the Rivas are these really cool kids. There's 4 of them. There's daughter, the oldest daughter, she is a model and she's a big surfer. The next brother is a surfer, and he's somebody who, the next one down, is constantly photographing on the beach. And then we've got a younger sister who's kind of coming into her own, but they're the Riva kids, and everybody knows the Riva kids in Malibu, and this party is legendary. But I'll tell you that by the time this party's over the next day, what has happened is everything has burned to the ground. And the way that this whole story comes together, and I mean literally the house is burning, of what happens. So what we're setting up on that day is everybody's talking on the beach. Everybody's talking about the stores, going to the Rivas, going to Rivas. And we were all growing up, we all had a party that everybody heard the buzz about like that. Like, are you going tonight? Who's going? Everybody's going to be there. It becomes that line of everybody, and everybody who's cool and everybody who's this. So the Riva kids are throwing this party, and the Riva kids are descendants of Mick Riva, who was a big star. Think like Frank Sinatra. Think about like, sultry singer like that. And he's been gone from these kids for years and years and years. But they've got the pedigree that they're Mick Riva's kids. And then we're going to trace back all through the years of when he met their mother and came into their life, and what happened to all the family through the years that gets us up to the point of this party. So once again, we're going back in decades and then moving forward. And like I said, I'm surprised that nobody's put that happens in these two books together. But I've spent some time in Malibu, and I really think she captures the vibe of what's going on there, which I think is really important. Oh, and Mick Riva, if you recognize him, yeah, he's been in two others of Taylor's books. Kind of sly little thing on her part, but dare you to go sit there and figure out where he is, because she slyly dropped him in there for you as well.
And what was really nice about Malibu Rising is Taylor Jenkins Reid was writing it while Daisy Jones and the Six was sort of becoming popular by word of mouth. And so it's her first really big, out there, successful book. Right. And it's great to see people talking about it.
And what's really nuts is her book, Seven Husbands of Eleanor, Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Okay, I think I've got it right. I read that as well. That's the other book that's in this trilogy kind of a thing. And they take place in different decades going up as you sit and read them. And that book has come back onto the New York Times bestseller list based on something that was happening on TikTok. So you talk about this crazy time happening for Taylor at this point, that she's got one book on the hardcover list. She had this book coming back on the paperback list that was made by TikTok. These people going out and making a TikTok video can make stuff happen. I know, Austin, I think we're gonna have to think about TikTok next year. I don't know. I'm not dancing. You'll have to do
We'll figure it out. I'll dance.
You'll dance.
Nobody wants to see me dance. Next, we have 4 books that were inspired by places that authors lived. 3 of them from their childhoods and 1 of them from their adulthood life. So could you talk about those a bit?
Yeah, so what we've got is What Could Be Saved by Lise O'Halloran Schwartz. And this is a book I really wished would be bigger this year. I thought this was completely well done. The book is set in Bangkok, where she lived as a child and has very, very fond memories of being there. And in this book, it sort of takes place over a time period where a mother is there. She doesn't really want to be there. She wants to be back in the States. She doesn't want to be living over there. But over here, she's kind of living like a queen at the same time, because she's got the embassy and she's got help and all these things that are just magical and fabulous for her. But she wants to be back where, she was somebody in the States as well. So we've got this family that over the course of one day, one child is going to go missing, and is going to haunt this family for the rest of their lives, of what really happened to this child. But what happens one day in the future is one of the sisters gets a call and says, I know where your brother is. I know where he is, and I want you to come get him. And I know everything about what he's been up to doing. And is this a scam to get her to go back? Is this something that's really legit? What's going to happen? And what you go back to is that day, how things could have happened differently, that this boy would not have been taken all those years ago from his family, and what has happened in the intervening years to every single member of this family. I think this is so well done. It's a great family story. I believe that before this, she had written poetry, if I remember correctly, and this is her debut novel. Mm-hmm. And she started as a short story years ago and was building on it for years and years, and it became What Could Be Saved. I love this. I believe it's out in paperback now. So anybody who hasn't taken a look at it, I highly encourage you to do it. Next book is also based on something that a family went through, and this is Damnation Spring by Ash Davidson. And I think Austin and I both walked away from this interview remembering the same line, that she's never drunk water out of a tap after her childhood growing up, she's always drunk bottled water. And I heard her say that in a couple of publisher previews. And when we interviewed her, we discussed it. And she said, yes, this is exactly the way I feel. And she said, because she grew up in the area around Damnation Spring in California, where a lot of the logging ends up happening, where they're taking down these large redwood trees. And in this particular book, we've got sort of a dual problem going on. We've got people who make their money by doing all the forestry and taking down all these trees. And then we've got people that are fighting against any kind of destruction to the lands at all whatsoever. And at the same time, the companies that are the lumber companies that are walking in to try to take down these trees are also deforesting the land, because it makes it much easier to come in and cut down these trees later. And what is that doing? That's infecting the water supply. So our protagonist in this book is figuring out that a lot of the children in the area are being born with birth defects. And she is having a lot of trouble. She's had a number of miscarriages, hasn't been able to carry a child, and they're tracing it back to possibly what's going on in the water. At the same time, her husband, to try to make his way and make it for his family, instead of just logging all these years, has bought the 24/7 ridge, which is this ridge far up the hill that's got, or up the mountain, that's got great redwoods on it. And if he can mine this, his family is going to be set for life. And then there's what happens along the way of him not telling her what's going on with this, the secret that she's keeping about what's going on with the water and what she's learning to know, that really makes it what's happening in Damnation Spring. So this is Ash's first book. I think she said it took her 10 years to write, and I told her she has to write faster the next time. Remember we were talking about that with her?
But the fact that it was 10 years means that it's one of those books that just, you can dive in and you can tell that she worked on it and she kept revamping it and knew the way to make it good.
Yeah, and she kept talking about how she changed it so many different times and what the ending was going to be, how it was going to go. But when she talks about always drink the bottled water, every time I open the tap now, I hate to say it, but I think about that, because I remember what she said about she's never drunk tap water. And she said, we've always carried bottles. And she was showing us, like, the bottles that she walks around with all the time. So very interesting, because it's sort of like that background on the stories. I think that's the reason we've enjoyed interviewing these authors so much, is that you learn so much what's happening behind the scenes that we just finished the interview sometimes to go, whoa, we never saw that coming, right?
We would never think about that. And really interesting that you said that, because it's a book about deforestation. It's a book that involves a lot of the things we're talking about with climate change. And a lot of the conversation around that is don't drink bottled water. So to hear the reverse from someone who is talking about, it's something that you've got to read to really, like, uncover.
Yeah, and I did not know that. I visited the redwoods when I was a kid. Like, I've been up to that Muir Woods. I've been up to the whole area where it's beautiful up there. But by the same token, I never really sat and thought about how you take those trees out. And when she was talking about the danger that goes into those jobs, I knew it was dangerous, but I didn't realize how everybody has a different role in going up and doing that. Like, we've taken down trees around our house, but it's not quite the same thing as felling these really large trees.
Those are trees that you could wrap your arms around, not a redwood.
Yeah. We've got one in front of our house right now that they said is structurally unsound. And I always love when they sit there and say this tree is structurally unsound. Every time the wind blows now, I'm thinking about the tree that's structurally unsound,
Right.
Next up, we've got Of Women in Salt by Gabriel Garcia. And this is a really slim novel that is packed with lots to think about, lots to talk about. Great book for a book club discussion. Just sit here and look at my notes real quick. She's looking at the lives of two families of women from the days of the cigar factories. And yes, she did roll cigars as practice for this book, in 19th century Cuba to modern day Miami, with a detour to migrant detention centers sheltering refugees from Mexico. And she constructs and builds together a number of fractured story threads and delivers some powerful storytelling. And the fact she does it in 204 pages is pretty incredible. And the book is going to shift perspective from woman to woman in this story. Each one's going to have their own chapter and be talking about what's going on. And you're going to see the story as it shifts from each of their points of view, which to me makes it so interesting because we often see something just through our eyes, and here she is moving the story through everyone else's eyes as well. And also, I'm proud to say she's a graduate of Fordham University, where I went to school. Tom Donato, our editorial director, did, and so did my son Greg. So we're very proud that she's a Fordham girl. And it was really fun for the Fordham magazine to open up and see an excerpt of this book a couple of months ago. So there you go. And don't let the page count fool you, though. Like, there's a lot between this work, lot to pay attention to. And next, we've got a book called In Every Mirror She's Black by Lola Ahmadi Akastram. And I'm very proud I can say her name. Lola is really an interesting personality, besides the fact that she's an interesting author. She is actually a writer and a photographer, has done a lot of work for National Geographic. She's traveled the world. She's done all those big stories that you see, that she's penned with the great photography that she's also done behind them. So she's got this whole other career. But what she's talking about in this book is something that she sort of started noodling around when she moved to Sweden. A picture, when you think of someone who's Black moving to Sweden, where everyone really, they always say, is white and blonde, and how she felt like she always looked different. When she walked in a room, it was different. And in every mirror, she's Black. And here she's got 3 different women that she's talking about. They're going for the perspectives of Kemi Adamami. She's a marketing executive who's living in the United States. And a Swedish marketing company says to her, we need you to come over. We need to get better optics on what's going on when we're talking about race. And we need to be more cognizant of what we're doing, because they've just had a terrible snafu. But they bring her over there, and they really don't want her to do that. They just want her to be the name of the face up there. And Austin and I found this so interesting when we were talking to her about it, because it was, people are being put in roles, not for the right reasons, but because it's the right thing to do. So she's there, she's got no backup, she's got no support. So the second woman is a model who's also met Johnny, who runs this marketing firm, on an airplane. And she's beautiful, she's the flight attendant, and she's also Black. And Johnny wants her in his life. And Johnny brings her to Sweden, and he wants her to be special to him for reasons that we learn later on. And she's also someone that his mother and father do not want anything about, because they know there's this history behind with Johnny. The third woman is a woman who works as a cleaner in the marketing company where they work. And she's sort of that person that's unseen. We all know those people that are working in offices. They come in, they do their job. They're either sitting in security at the front desk, or even in a job like hers that you're even less known. Person coming in and emptying the garbage, but what they know and what they see, because of where they're walking around, that everybody talks in front of them, but doesn't think they're hearing them. And what the stories of these 3 women are, all living in Sweden, and what their connections are. I think she's done a terrific job on this book. She was fabulous to talk to. I remember she was so effervescent and fun to talk to about what she does with the rest of her career. So I hope she writes something else. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And I think you agree, Austin, she was terrific.
Oh, definitely. And she had such a different perspective than the one we get a lot in America, just because she's been everywhere.
Right. And she met her husband on, what was it? It wasn't Match.com. It was something like very, very, years ago. It's how she met her husband and how she ended up in Sweden. So she's got a great backstory to herself as well. I'm a huge fan of Nadia Hashimi's. So I was really excited to see her new book, Sparks Like Stars, was out. So in this book, it starts set in 1978, where Sidara Zamani is a 10-year-old African girl, and she's living this really privileged life in Kabul. And her family has these fabulous parties, everything wonderful happens. She's living this really privileged life, but there are a lot of people outside the palace that aren't living so well. So one night, there is the family is going to be going to a fabulous party, and there's some sadness in her family because they lost a daughter before she was born. But these days, she's still living this happy and carefree life. So there's this burden hanging over the family at the time that they're celebrating all this joy. And their peaceful existence is completely taken to shreds when one night a coup takes place, and in evening, her entire family is slain. Everyone is killed. And she is the only survivor, and she's hidden away by someone in the American foreign government who takes pity on her and actually brings her to America and raises her as her child. So she has this fabulously wonderful life, but always in the back of her mind is what happened that night at the palace. what happened to my family? What happened to these people that I knew and I loved so well, and my cousins and everybody else there, because the coup that night took out everybody. And she's like, the person that was left behind. And she's works to be a doctor, and she's a very, very successful doctor. And one day a patient comes in and says, I know where your family's buried. Like, I know what's going on. And she immediately wants to know more of how can you take me and what's happened. And she's on a mission to find this family, where they're buried, and what happens next, and what are all the things that she finds along the way. So there are sparks like stars. When she looks up at the stars of the night, what is she sitting there and thinking about the family that's been left behind? And Nadia is very, very passionate because she knows living in Afghanistan. She's gone back and forth there with her family for years. And so she knows the place when it was a place where it was like lush and beautiful, and has heard stories about that, and has to contrast that with what she's hearing and seeing now. So I thought she was very powerful when we were talking to her, because she brought that past to the present at the same time.
Definitely.
So,
and it's interesting how many of these books are about family. And it's sort of in the way that Paper Palace, which was brought up at the very beginning, was about family and marriage. And our next book is also about that, at Morningside Heights.
Yeah, Morningside Heights by Joshua Henkin. And this is a book actually that was delayed a year coming out because of the pandemic. They held it a year because they wanted to make sure it got its due. And here we've got a book that's set up in New York City. And there's a young girl who is going to Columbia. And it's 1974, and her name is Prue. And she's taking a class with Spence Robin, who is the young Shakespeare professor. He's the guy on campus. He is the professor that everyone wants to go to the classes for. And he's making a name for himself. And the relationship quickly it turns from professional to personal. And all of a sudden, then he's the pride of the university. But who's she? What does she become as a result of this? She's kind of walking in his shadow, and she has a life, but she doesn't have the life that she might have followed if she took a couple of different turns in 1974, one of which would have been not marrying him. And then one day she notices that things are wrong. Something's off with him. And she realizes that he's really suffering from the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. And how is she going to come to terms with this? Because it's so difficult for her to be going through these feelings, for watching him decline, watching the great man take steps backwards. And then what happens to her when she meets somebody else? How is she going to feel about another relationship in her life right now? Or how is she feeling about taking care of this person who she's getting calls from the university of saying, could you please take him away? Could you please take him out from where he is with him right now? This Morningside Heights, I think that this title and this cover is going to mean a lot, because what's the emptiness that starts happening behind the man? And I think that this is one of those books that there'll be a lot to be talked about, because she's conflicted in the book. And I think there are a lot of people that'll be reading the book that could understand the conflict that she's going through.
And you said before that that's a great book for book clubs. Another one that we have coming up is The Breakup Book Club by Wendy Wax.
And that has got the perfect title, in The Breakup Book Club. So what we've got in this book is a really terrific look at a number of people who are going through changes in their lives right now. Things have not gone right for them. Somebody's in the middle of a breakup. Somebody else is ready to leave her husband. Like, all these things are going on with these people. And yet they're getting together at this bookstore that just sounds fabulous. The kind of bookstore you'd love to find yourself in. And it's actually based on a bookstore that Wendy did know that was in the suburbs of Georgia. And I've actually been to that bookstore as well, that a friend of ours owned. And in this book, these people who are in all different periods of their lives right now are getting together, and they're talking about books. And when they come together, the rest of their lives fade away, and they speak about the books that are there. And then they become friends with each other, and as they start hearing about each other's lives, and they start coming to be there for each other. And at the same time, all throughout the book, they're trying to come up with what the name of the book club is going to be. So you can just about figure it out from the title, what that book club ends up being. Wendy did something really fun when she was trying to come up with the name for book clubs, whatever. She put it out to her readers, and she came up with a number of really terrific names that people said their book clubs were called. And my book club, the one I'm in right now, is the Long Hill Book Club. And it's because that's the place where we originally, we've been meeting. So from there, it's like you start talking about all the names of book clubs, and we see a lot of them on reading group guides. And it's so much fun to say, like, where did you come up with this name? A lot of them have wine in them and drinking and things like that. So this is a Breakup book club, but there's a glass of wine right there on the cover of the book. So that's what we've got first for our fiction segment.
Yep, that's everything for fiction. And next we have historical fiction. And we're going to start off with what was probably the best-selling book of the year.
You got it. We've got The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. Anybody who knows Kristin Hannah's books knows that we wait for them. So this is not a book a year author. This is an author that you wait for books from. So we've had the last three have been The Nightingale, The Great Alone, and now The Four Winds. And with The Four Winds, she mines some very different territory. While a lot of people have been writing about places that we've talked about a lot in historical fiction, she's looking at someplace very, very different for us at this moment. And going back and taking a look at what happened in the Great Plains during the dust storms, and what happens to the people from there. Like these people whose farms are ravaged. And every morning when they get up, it's a taste of dust in their mouths. And there are no crops, nothing's growing. And it's this feeling of depression that's airing all around you. The people are feeling broken. And they're sitting there with their lives trying to figure out where they're going to go next and what they're going to be. And the cornerstone of this book is a woman named Elsa. And what's really interesting about this book is when we were interviewing Kristin, we learned that Elsa was not even a character when she first started writing this book. In fact, she was 250 pages into writing the book when all of a sudden she scrapped everything she had before because she'd met Elsa as a character and realized Elsa was definitely the person that was going to be at the heart of the story. And that was interesting for us because when we're talking to people, they often don't admit or talk about what the changes were in their books along the way. And to sit there and say that I threw out that many pages of work to sit there and get myself on the right course of where to take this character. And it becomes this very strong character that we want to know and we want to be championing. And it's a woman that is at a point in her life where she's with a family that has always done everything the right way, the perfect way. And she comes home, she's pregnant at some point, and she instead is booted from her home and goes out and lives out on this farm with this family where she knows nothing. She's been living in town all these years. And she's out in this area with these people where they're farming the land and they're looking at her like, what do you know what to do? And it's an Italian family. And the mother starts bringing her in and teaching her, this is how food is prepared. This is how we do things. This is how things are done. But she's still lonely because she's out there in this farmland. And the guy that she's married isn't really the best guy at all. And all of a sudden, like life takes many, many different turns. And she starts saying, like, maybe we need to leave. Maybe we need to go. And the only way for us to survive is to leave. And with a very broken down truck that they're going to go travel with, or broken down ways with tragedy happening all along the way, she gets out to California, where she starts to work into the fields and tries to keep her family together that way. While she's got a teenage daughter that's sort of like storming around the place and a young son. And she's got people that she's got to be taking care of, with all this pressure on her at the same time. At the same time, she's finding a renewed sense of power in herself at the same time. Somebody who's going to take on the growers that are telling the workers, this is what you need to do, and to strike and to sit there and try and start really earning what people should be getting for themselves as well. So The Four Winds is the story that takes place in a couple of parts of the country. It'll remind you of Grapes of Wrath. It'll remind you of these stories of hardship. And it was really interesting to have this book coming out in February of 2021, when we're all sitting there dealing with a couple of years of the pandemic, and we're going, how hard it is. And we don't know what hard is when we sit there and look at a book like this. And for Kristin, it's a real tour de force kind of a thing, because it's kind of book that many book clubs have picked up. On reading group guides, I believe that every month since this book comes out, it's been one of our top selections of what people are reading and what they're talking about. And when my group talked about it, they were saying that they just wanted to read more. And Kristin's got a lot more on her site of both photographs and great other resources for reading that readers are going to want to think about. So this is The Four Winds. And once again, it's probably one of the best-selling books of the year.
And Carol, you interviewed interviewed Kristin early for the Morristown Festival of Books. Unfortunately, we don't have the video of that, but we do have it as a podcast. So if you're interested in hearing Kristin's take on it, that might be a place that you can go to hear more.
Right. And I don't have every single tiny detail because I don't want to share the whole thing, but there's lots to discuss, making a perfect thing for book groups. And it's, California's always been called the promised land, but just as like, Isabel the Nightingale and what she's thinking of, like, what's going to happen. You've got these people that are under these real moments of hardship. And she's like, how far can I take these women to get to the next point of what they can overcome? So really
Definitely.
Special book.
Very similar. Our next book is The Children's Blizzard, which follows a bit of a similar theme. So why don't you talk about that?
So the Children's Blizzard by Melanie Benjamin. This is her 7th book, and I think it's her strongest so far. It's historical fiction that's set in the Great Plains against the backdrop of a major event that happened on January 12th, 1888. And on that day, the world was unseasonably warm. The weather was unseasonably warm. And everybody sent their children to school with light jackets on. And people didn't bundle up their shoes. They weren't wearing their sturdy boots and whatever. And that day, a huge blizzard came in. A blizzard of historic proportions came in. And the question was, do you leave the children in the schoolhouse where there's very little wood for the fireplace to keep them warm, or do you send them home? What are your choices about what to do that day? And many of the school teachers we don't really think about were teenagers. They weren't like the seasoned professionals. They were people that were 16 and 17 years old that were teaching these children in these little little houses and these little schoolhouses. So the snowstorm comes in. What do you do with the children? And what you make as a decision that day, these 2 sisters will haunt them for the rest of their lives, because one makes one decision and one makes the other. And it's really the story of 2 sisters, and the blizzard forms the framework of the story. And what I really like is, this is my fun tidbit on this one. The book was published on January 12th, 2021, 133 years to the day after the tragedy. And I like that was the way it was worked into the pub day. And I remember when she says, that you're publishing on the same day that was the historical day of the book. So once again, another book where it's something where we don't know anything about this, but we can think about it every winter storm from here. I'm sure you'll be thinking about this book if you've read it.
Next up, we have 2 books that are from Marie Benedict. And one of them she co-authored with someone, but we'll talk about the book that she wrote alone first.
Right. So her first book, and Marie Benedict is a book that readers on our site and readers on Reading Group Guides know very, very well. Known for her historical fiction, talking about the woman behind the man, or now she calls it the woman beside the man. And in this book, she's taken someplace a little bit of different tact, because Mrs. Christie, Agatha Christie, is a legend unto herself. Well, Agatha Christie is very well known. And what this book is about is this 11-day disappearance that happened to her. And where did she actually go on those 11 days in 1926 when she went missing? And I have to admit, I did not know about this part of Agatha Christie's life, but it brings us into this big mystery writer, her family, and what was really going on behind the scenes. What was she thinking about her husband? What was she doing? Why was she going? And we don't answer all the questions in the book, but we get a lot of really good thinking about what was going on. So for Marie, once again, it's taking a look at a character in history that we know, but we've never really thought about in this possible way. And for her second book, she actually picked up a co-author, which was something new for her. And it's a book called The Personal Librarian. And she writes this book with Victoria Christopher Murray. And the 2 of them found each other kind of interestingly. When Marie discovered the story that she wanted to do, she knew that she didn't want to write the story alone. She knew that she was going to need a partner. She was going to need a partner from the African-American community who would be able to write the story with her and be able to tell the story in an authentic kind of a way. And she didn't want it just be coming from her lens, because this is a really interesting story about a woman whose name is Belle DaCosta Green. And she was the personal librarian for J.P. Morgan. And this woman bought his art collection. She bought his the writings, the paintings, sculptures, great works of art, everything that this man, writings, maps that he had in his collection. She was the one that was purchasing. She was traveling the world. She was going out and doing this. And what was happening at the same time that no one knew is she was passing. She was Black, and she was raised as white by her mother. They moved up from Washington, D.C. When her mother moved her here, she felt that the children could be better educated if they passed as white. So her whole life she was passing, but at the same time, she always wondered when she walked in a room, would the waiter recognize her? Would someone know who she was? Should she just give a nod? How should she behave? So at the same time, her father is Richard Greener. He was the first Black graduate of Harvard, and he's pushing for justice for Black people at the same time as she is sitting there working with him, trying at every moment not to be found. And she has a rip-roaring affair with one of the other people in the art world. And what does that do to her life? Because at any moment she could be found. And I found that it was really interesting when we were interviewing both of them. We had a really interesting discussion with both of them about how they came to write the story together and how they were putting together the pieces of the story and what Victoria was lending to Marie, et cetera. And they are working on another book together, which I was very excited to hear about. But wasn't it fun to hear about how well, it was really funny because Victoria said that it had only taken her a couple of weeks to get back to Marie, and Marie was going, no, it was more like a couple of months. So it was very, very funny that did you like that exchange, like when they were going back and forth? So
yeah, and seeing how they work together, seeing, who came up with the ideas, who wrote things out, how they edited together, all of that. It's really amazing what they were able to pull together.
And it was a Good Morning America selection. And actually they shot a lot of the footage for it at the Morgan Library in the city. So it was really fun for people to be able to get out and get to see the library when most people aren't getting out and seeing much these days. So it was really terrific.
Definitely. Now, next we're moving into the part of historical fiction that some people are getting tired of, but some people just can't get enough of, World War II.
Right. And, it's so funny because everybody says, oh, I don't want to read another book about World War II. Oh, and every time I do a presentation live, people just like groan at this point. Yet the 4 books we're going to be talking about World War II, one is like more terrific than the next. And I think there's a lot of the story we have in mind, including our first author, is Lisa Scottoline, and her book is Eternal. And for Lisa, you know her name, you're like, whoa. This is a thriller writer. This is Lisa, who's been writing the Rosada stories. Like, what is this that she's doing? It's a very different book. It's her first book of historical fiction. She traveled over to Rome to do research for this book, to pull together her story, and she knocked it like out of the park with her first historical fiction. And what it's wonderful is there's these 3 characters in the book. I confess to having my own level of World War II fatigue, but this one being set in Rome and talking about the rise of fascism in Rome was something I really had not thought about, and Mussolini's role and what ended up happening to the Jews that were in Italy. Never really thought about the Jewish community in Italy, how these people were persecuted, how they were sent to these the areas where they were camping them together in Rome, how they wanted them out of the country, and everything that was going on. And we're seeing it through the eyes of 3 young children. They're teenagers. There's a wonderful girl named Elisabetta, who's a beautiful young woman, and she's got 2 suitors. One is Sandra, who's bookish, and Marco, who's a brash biker. And visualizing what's happening to these people during their lives, the boy is the intellectual, is Jewish, and he's going to be taken away with the rest of his family and put into the ghetto. And what's going to happen to them from there is a big part of what's going on in the story. And watching just how everybody is relating, how the times are getting tough and what is going on. And for Lisa to be able to walk the streets and see where this whole story was happening was really, really fabulous. She put together a video series that ran, she actually ran it on Facebook every, I think it was Tuesday night, that she would be on and she'd be talking about, this is what I shot, this is how it's going to be in the book. And it became, I believe it's a 26-week series, which is also on her website now. And it was wonderful because it gave her a chance to do background on the book and why she came to write it and what she's ended up, why she came to want to feel so strongly about writing about these characters and writing about these people. And you see this woman, from the back on the bicycle, and you're realizing that's how people got around. That's what they did. Their world was so different, and how it changes as life goes on. And it's got a beautiful ending to it as well. Lisa's next book is going to be a thriller. It's What Happened to the Bennetts, and it's coming out on March 29th. And then she's going back to historical fiction because she enjoyed this, and the reception from readers was so good that she's going back to a book that's set in Sicily is her next book, and she's been over doing research on that. So Lisa Scottoline, huge for somebody to make a switch over like that and have it work so well. Huge congratulations.
And it's really nice to be able to see the World War II stories that aren't often told. Another one of these, it was kind of a story that was lost or hidden in The Last Green Valley.
Yeah. And Last Green Valley is by Mark Sullivan, who wrote one of my all-time favorite books, which is Beneath the Scarlet Sky. And anybody who I think came into my house for a couple of years was getting a gift of a present of, like, we must read Beneath the Scarlet Sky. People were calling me afterwards, just loving his writing and loving his book. And Mark had gotten that story from someone who had told him about it in his town of Bozeman, Montana. So he's trying to decide what he's going to write next, can't come up with what to do. And he hears, while he's giving a talk at the Rotary Club in Bozeman, Montana, about Beneath the Scarlet Sky, somebody comes up to him afterwards and says, you really need to go meet this family, the Martell family. And they live here in Bozeman, but they've got a great story about World War II and coming from the Ukraine. And he says to her, and he's like, really? And he goes, yes, you need to go meet these people. And we think that they've got a story that you should tell. So he goes around to go meet them at their home and goes to one of the Martell brothers' homes. And as he gets there, he realizes he's maybe 100 yards from where he heard at the first dinner party about the story for Beneath the Scarlet Sky. So his agent and all of us keep teasing him and saying, Mark, where are you going to go roaming the neighborhood next? Where is there another story? Because the idea that two really big stories like this came out of walking around or talking in Bozeman, Montana is pretty crazy. So this story is set in the Ukraine in 1944, where the Martell family is offered two options. They can either wait for Stalin to arrive, or they can run with the Nazis. And just think about those are your options. Your options are to stay to the people that have already starved you in your family once, or you're going to take off and run with the Nazis. Family has been living in this land that was bequeathed by, let me just get this completely straight, by Catherine the Great, because they were in the Ukraine to farm land that was gifted to them by Catherine the Great, because she realized her locals were not really great farmers, and she needed to bring more food and wheat and everything to the land. So she brought these people in, but they are ethnic Germans. So now when they go home, they are purebred. And as Stalin is wielding his power, they're going back to where Hitler is, where they are purebred Germans. They are the elite. And they are, they've done this run, and they start out with a wagon driven by two horses. And it's like the people leaving in the American West 100 years ago. They huddle together, they're going out, not sure what their future is going to bring. And they really don't want to go into Germany. They really don't. They know this is not the best option as well. So they leave their truck, their wagon behind, and they go by train. And something happens. I'm not going to tell you that along the way, the family gets separated, and they keep saying, just go west. We'll find each other. And you think about that in today's, we can't find each other in the mall. Think about you're going to find each other, that I'm yelling to you as you're sitting in Germany and you're headed one way and I'm headed in the other direction. And what I think that it happens with this is you start to see really the grit, and you saw this in Kristin's book, and you see it in Eternal, and you saw in the Children's Blizzard, the grit that people have, what they have that they bring to the party for themselves. And as a result, this family goes on, and yes, they do end up in Bozeman because they keep looking for the Last Green Valley. They keep looking for this beautiful plot of land, and that's where they find it. And what is amazing for me is I read this whole book. The book is super sad. Excuse me. It gets to the end, and that's where I cry. I'm crying at the end because this family because they've all come together, and what has happened. I mean, I'm not giving anything away because, at the beginning that the children survived enough to talk to Mark. So what you're seeing at this point is what these people went through and what their lives became here, and hear what happens later on is wonderful. Like Beneath the Scarlet Sky, we heard about what happened to the protagonist there later on and what went on in his life. So lives didn't end in the war. Not all lives ended in the war. What happened from there?
Now, the next two books were both inspired by authors that had traveled overseas. Let's start with the the Woman with the Blue Star.
Woman with Blue Star by Pam Jenoff. Pam was employed by the State Department and was in the late 90s, and she was assigned to the U.S. consulate in Krakow for 2 years. And there was documentation of Jews that were hiding in the sewers in another town in Poland, which sparked the idea for the story. So in this book, it's a story of Sadie Galt, a young woman who takes refuge with her pregnant mother in the sewers below the Krakow ghetto, because they know this is the only way that they're going to be able to survive, because the Nazis are beginning to ship the Polish Jews to the camps in the middle of World War II. So one day, another young German girl walks by, and she's, well-to-do Polish girl, spies Sadie through the grate and looks down and goes, "That's a child. That's like somebody like my age that's under there." And she starts to help her, bringing food, bringing herself into all kinds of danger, and also putting in danger the people that are in the sewer living down below, because what is going to happen for them at any moment if they are found? And is she somebody who's really going to help them? Is she a spy? And you realize in these books how much trust has to come to mean something. And how many times would you really trust somebody with your life? And when you think about this in these situations, think about so many things you go through. Would you have to trust somebody that they're going to bring you the food that you continue to live and not rat you out? Like they're going to continue. And this girl down below is going to be able to get the rest of the people down there to do what she wants them to do. Really tricky question. How are you actually going to, what are you actually going to do? And, how are you really going to survive? And at the same time, remember, they're in the sewers. And what happens in the sewer? Water goes in the sewer. And when the water gets really deep, what happens? So this is a book where everybody's life is on the edge at every single moment.
The next book is The Paris Library.
Paris Library is by Janet Skelton Charles, and she actually worked at the American Library in Paris, which gave her the idea for this book, because she realized that what happened behind the scenes during World War II, what was happening to these people. So this spans 60 years and brings readers from the lights of Paris to a small town in Montana. In 1939, Odile is a librarian at the American Library in Paris, whose patrons are from many countries. It's a dream job because she delights in sharing her books with readers and the joy of working with her colleagues. And she just loves her job there. She loves working there. And all of a sudden, the Nazis invade the city. Her twin brother is taken prisoner by the Germans as he fights on foreign soil, and life changes very, very quickly for her as new rules are coming down every day. And at one point, it's dictated that Jewish people cannot receive library materials anymore. And the librarians take this on as a challenge, as we know librarians always do. And they begin ferreting out this information on the slide, which brings danger at every checkpoint. And Odile's father is a police chief, and through him, she meets Paul, a young officer, and she becomes enamored with him. Their time together is a lovely escape from the trauma of the war. And then the second part of the story we pick up, it's 1983. And there's this teenager in Montana, teenager named Lily. She lives in a small town in Montana, and her mom's ill, and she's a little bit unmoored. And she becomes even more so when her mom dies and her dad remarries, and they're two young half brothers. So Odile is her elderly neighbor. She moved there as a war bride. So through her, Lily gets to envision life beyond their small town. And history is woven into the pages, as well as more about how Odile came to Montana. So it's a beautiful, well done story. And Janet shared more in our interview about how the story is personal to her from the story about her time at the American Library in Paris.
Now, both of those books were inspired overseas, but the next book on the list, The Yellow Wife by Sadiqa Johnson, was inspired in a different way during a family outing.
Exactly. Sadiqa was on a trip with her family, walking a slave trail in Richmond, Virginia, with her family and some friends. And all of a sudden, she started really thinking about, wait, what am I walking on? What is the history here? What's the story? And she'd never written historical fiction before. She'd been known as a romance, lighter kind of writer. And all of a sudden she says, wait a second, I've got to figure out what happened to these people. And then she read a marker notes and saw the site of a jail, and it sent her researching. And from there, she came up with the story of Phoebe Dolores Brown, who was born on a plantation in Charles City, Virginia. Her life is more pampered than many other slaves, as her father is the master. Her yellow skin means she has privileges. and there are people that don't really love that. And she's now 17, and her mother has been promised by her master that she will be freed on her 18th birthday. But from the beginning, you really feel like there's a slim chance that that's going to happen. And master's wife despises her for what she represents to her, a dalliance by her husband. So from the moment she has a moment to send Phoebe away, she is going to send her. And she thrusts her in a very different world. And she's taken to Devil's Half Acre, a jail in Richmond that has a brutal reputation for torturing slaves. And there, like her mother, she is pulled out for special treatment. And the jailer has her bear his children, but she's never felt meant to feel safe. She's always longing for a boy that she knew back on the plantation, this boy that meant a lot to her, and a boy that's like, is she going to come back into contact with her now? And at a time when race is at the forefront of our national conversation, a look back at the roots of slavery and its terrible consequences is handled so well here, because we always thought about, this is what whites are, this is what slaves are. And this gives you a story about people on the move, people where things were very, very different, and the little nuances that happened along the way as well. It's a lot to discuss. Once again, another slim novel, but a lot to discuss in this book. And she's brilliant as talking about it, if you could ever for your discussion.
Sorry to interrupt. The next two books are both from debut authors. Let's start with Mask of Honor.
Let's start with Mask of Honor. Mask of Honor is a historical novel of the American South by Sharon Virts. And I've heard a lot of authors talk about what inspired them. And they've been inspired by a book they read or walking on a trail someplace. Very few people have been inspired by the home that they live in. All right. So here's what we've got with Sharon. She was restoring her home in Leesburg, Virginia, which is called Selma. And if you go online, you look, there's fabulous pictures about the restoration of this home and what she's done. She just put up some beautiful pictures of her Christmas trees the other day. And she started looking into its history. And, what is this house? House has been here for so long. And she came upon the story of a duel between Armistead Mason and John Jack Mason McCarty, who were brothers-in-law, second cousins, and descendants of the founding father, George Mason IV. And though she had never written before, she's done beautiful artwork. In fact, I want to get one of her paintings, which are beautifully done with this technique that looks like she's doing with a knife. They're just stunning. The story behind this duel captivated her, and she researched further to come up with the bones of this debut novel. Yes, it's got the duel, but it also has passion, scheming, and lots of period details. And it's set during the same period as Bridgerton, which many have lapped up on Netflix and just gone crazy about the period, the costumes, whatever. And this book is an intimate look at the time in history that's not been dwelled on much in contemporary historical fiction. And I'm looking forward to seeing what she does next. So there we've got Mask of Honor.
And then we move to Montana for the setting of You Belong Here Now.
And I'm loving Montana because I watch Yellowstone on TV. Like, let's take the chopper. I'm like totally into this. So I was set a book set in Montana with You Belong Here Now. Loved it. And it's a book that William Kent Kruger said was one of the finest debuts he's ever read. And that's pretty big praise coming from an author who has read so much. It's set in Montana in 1925, and it's about three orphans that are traveling west on an orphan train from New York City. And we're traveling west, they're getting to Montana, they're realizing they haven't been adopted yet. There's a really good chance they're not going to be adopted at all. And as a result, they're sitting there going, maybe we should just jump off the train and check our luck out and see what happens. So these two young boys and a little girl jump off the train and stumble their way onto a ranch in Montana. And they kind of lie their way about who they are and what they've done. And everybody knows they're lying, but they're letting them get away with it to a degree. But there's a daughter that lives on the property, and all she sees is these two boys are going to try and usurp her a role on that ranch, because she's the one that wants to be in charge someday. She's the one that wants to keep running it. And Nara's going, my gosh, if these people come on, what is it going to mean for me and my role? And what happens to them in their relationships with this little girl and with these two boys, and what happens along the way is really what, against the spectacular backdrop of Montana, is just what the readers are going to want to see. And she's on debut to keep an eye on. And I think that with travel not happening that much these days, you want to go feel Montana and this part of the country through her eyes. So there we've got You Belong Here Now by Diana Rosted.
And again, William Kent Kruger couldn't speak more highly of that. And speaking of William Kent Kruger, We are about to move into thrillers, and the first book on the list is from him.
Love this cover of this book. Yes, folks, it's in my colors. It's in my color scheme that I love best. So that's not the only reason I love this book. For readers who have fallen in love with Kent already, knowing his books Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, you got a real treat in Lightning Strike, and you got it for a couple of reasons. This is a prequel to his Cork O'Connor series, which is a 17-book series. So if you start reading this and love the characters, which we've heard from many readers that they're excited about, you know that you have a whole treasure trove of books in front of you to read. At the same time, if you've loved the childhood innocence that he's written about in Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, you feel it again in Lightning Strike. So you've got two different reasons to why to come to read this book. Lightning Strike takes the readers back to the beloved character and with a backstory that's just pitch perfect. And they're going to connect with Cork that they came to know, but they're going to come back and embrace his youth. There are things that you didn't know about Cork in his youth that you're going to be able to connect with now. As the book opens, Cork has found the body of a revered man hanging from a tree. And immediately there's an investigation that goes into play about what happened. Was this suicide? What happened to this person? And while Cork's father conducts an investigation as the town sheriff, Cork puts his own investigative skills and energy to work. Something's not adding up for either of them, but each has his own challenges to discover the truth. Cork, his background is mixed race. And this is going to be something that you're going to hear about again and again when you're listening while reading the series. And he's listening to his grandmother, who sees her life through the eyes of those on the reservation, while he's also seeing the views of those who are white in town. And while the subject matter is heavy on justice needs to be served, there are terrific period details that are coming to light here. And the ending is going to propel and answer some questions for longtime Cork fans, while being a story that's going to make you want to read the rest of the series as well. So it's nice then when a book that you're reading as a standalone has a brilliant series already in place for you to find. So this is Lightning Strike, and Kent is so beloved, especially among a lot of readers in the Midwest. And with Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, he widened his scope of what people were interested in. He has another Cork book coming next summer, and then he is working on another standalone, which I know that readers are going to be really anxious for.
So next up We Begin at the End. And when we had a Book Reporter Talks To with the author earlier this year, he began by talking about this crazy story of how he began writing. You've got to check it out. But for now, Carol, please take it away. Just talk about the book.
Yeah, it's just funny because when I first met Chris Whitaker and we were talking about We Begin at the End, he told that story at a pre-publication event. And I turned to him and I said, we need to interview you, because his story of how he came to publish this book is just so beyond and so crazy and so perfectly great. And I've heard him tell me a number of times, and sometimes it's a tall tale. Well, if it is, he's telling the same tall tale every single time, because it's just a really, really terrific story. Begin at the End is probably one of my favorite books of the year. It's set in both California and Montana. And what's really interesting is Chris has never stepped foot in either place. He's never been to California or Montana. He's pored over maps and pictures. He grew up in the UK. And the plot revolves around a young 13-year-old girl named Duchess Radley, and Duchess and a 40-something sheriff named Walk, both of whom have got tons of baggage. There's like lots behind these people that they're carrying around with them. Dutch is rebellious, she's tough, and she's fiercely protective of her brother, Robin. She calls herself an outlaw. She's like one of those girls you picture walking around with a pair of cowboy boots going, I am an outlaw, from a very young age. Duchess's mother's star has substance abuse issues and harbors a lot of guilt over the death of her sister, Sissy. Walk carries the burden of being responsible for his best friend, Vince, going to prison for 30 years from the time he was only 15 for the murder of Sissy. And Vincent is finally being freed, and Walk is pondering like what's going to be next for his friend, what's going to be next for his friend and his friendship. Through the years, he's been Duchess's protector, essentially her family. But Walk has just been diagnosed with an illness that's going to limit his life, and he can't be there for her the way he once was. The book is genre defying. It's both a coming of age and a mystery. But above all, it's simply a great read. It's like just one of those books, you sit down, you go at the end, whoa, that was great. And it wasn't exactly what I saw coming or whatever. Chris lives in the UK, and the fact that he's never been to California, Montana makes it even more like crazy that this book is so good, because it does feel like you're there in every single step of the way. So the book also has a brilliant ending, but we're not going to give it away. But it's a satisfying stunner that you're going to see at the very, very end of the book. So we begin at the end. Don't you dare begin at the end. You must begin at the beginning to find out what happens at the end. And you'll see the reason for this title. I cannot wait to see what Chris does next. I think the interview with us, he sat there and said he wasn't going to make his deadline of Christmas of this year, but we're hoping he's sitting there and writing now because it's just too good a book. Next, we've got, good.
Go for it, Carol.
Next, we've got The Power Couple, which is by Alex Berenson. I've enjoyed Alex's earlier standalone books, and I have to admit, I didn't read his John Wells series, but now he's here with a standalone thriller. And the press materials described it as Mr. and Mrs. Smith meets Taken, which is a great comp. I mean, I always used to get a big kick out of that movie Taken. Like, at any point, did these people start to realize that maybe like something was going to happen under the bed, or something was going to be going on? At what point do you sit there and go, he's in the movie? You know that something bad's going to happen here. Well, that's exactly the way you're sitting and feeling in this book, because this is it's both a look at a marriage through the eyes of a couple and a brisk espionage story. Anybody who's been married for a couple of years, few years, you know that your marriage starts to have ups, downs, all different little times it takes along the way. And at the same time, you both get used to each other. There's certain things that happen in your marriage. You're used to, he does this, you do that. And that's just the way the marriage flows. So here we've got Rebecca and Brian Unsworth. They're U.S. intelligence officers. She's with the FBI and he's with the NSA. And as the book opens, they're both on vacation celebrating their 20th anniversary with their teenage children. Now, personally, I'm just going to do an aside here, and I don't want to know who's going to spend their 20th anniversary going away with their teenage children, but I digress. It's personally part of the story, okay? So what should be an idyllic time in Barcelona is upended when their 19-year-old daughter, Kira, goes missing one night when she goes out clubbing. Well, she's not supposed to be going out clubbing. She kind of like lied her way and went out. And her younger brother, Tony, has noted that she's gone. And for a good part of the opening chapters, it's about trying to get her back. Rebecca employs everything she knows from working in the field in every angle she can. At the same time, we're seeing the story of their marriage from their eyes, from her eyes. She's clearly an alpha female, and I'm not giving away anything here about what happens to Kira. But we also, as we turn the pages, literally, we get Brian's point of view of the marriage, because all of a sudden, somewhere in the middle of this book, we get Brian's story. And you know how in stories, there's what happened, what she says happened, what he said happened, and what really happened. Well, now you're going to get Brian's take on everything that's going on. And even more about the marriage and everything else going on is revealed. And then you're going to realize that, wait a second, what are these two? Are they really up against each other? What is really going on here? And we see the strains that have never been in on this marriage for years, as well as the joyous moments. And there are many instances that I have to say, I try to figure out why this couple was still together. But just picture two powerful people who both have different ways that they can get to information and get kinds of knowledge. Remember, I used to have a friend that was with the FBI, and he said he would get together people, and he was level X at the FBI. If you were level X at the CIA, he could talk to you, but if not, he couldn't. And he said, be sitting in a room and you couldn't tell people whole things that were going on of what was going on. So picture these two people, they're married, they're trying to get their daughter back, and who knows what. Oh, look at the cover. Look how clever this is. It's totally different. You turn the book upside down. So we talked about that in the interview too. We talked to Alex. Okay, so next we've got Apples Never Fall by Liane Moriarty. And I confess to being a huge fan of many of her books, but not being a big fan of Nine Perfect Strangers, though I have watching the television adaptation of this. So call me like a completely an unbookish person for feeling that way. But sometimes we don't fall in love with the book, but we can have other ways that we do enjoy the story. So here, this is a family tale. Bring on the Delaney's, who are well known and loved in their Sydney suburb in Australia. For years, they ran a tennis academy, and they turned out champions. So there's one champion that kind of got away from them. It's this kid that went on and became a huge success. And he actually had walked away from their tennis camp. And they're now sold the family business, and they want to kick their lives back a notch. And that's proving to be pretty challenging. They miss the sound of the ball smacking onto the court, and they miss the energy of competition most of all. And just as they are stepping away, their early proteges seem to be hitting new strides. Yes, Harry Haddad, the tennis genius that Stan coached for years, well, he's now slamming down wins. And boy, this is really getting to Stan. So Harry could have been his ticket to fame. So now we've got these kids. We've got 4 kids, all right? And there's this usual sibling tension among them, but for the most part, they get along. They each have their own lives, but they're drawn together when the unthinkable happens. Their mother goes missing. One day she's gone, and as they ponder her disappearance, their discussion about where the blame for this lies. Was it their father's doing? What did he do? 2 of the children think he had a hand in it. The other 2 aren't so sure about it. But as a taught thrower, there's always something else awry, and there's this subplot of sorts about this young woman who shows up on their doorstep. Who is she and why is she interested in this family? So what we've got is apples never fall. Apples never falls too far from the tree. There's the end of the line of the little line, everybody. But you'll want to bite into this one. I know I couldn't resist. You'll want to bite into this apple and see what's going on. And next we've got an author that I call a one-sit read. I am one of those people who does not read ebooks. And a couple of summers ago, the next author, Shari LaPena's book, was only available as an ebook. And I took it for only one reason. I know I'm going to plaster myself into the lawn chair, and I was going to read that whole book from start to finish. And it wasn't going to matter that I lose my page or whatever, because Shari LaPena is my one-sit read. And in this book, we've got Not a Happy Family. And she's a perennial best-selling author for me. She's one of those people that I can't wait to see what she's written next. The book opens with a family at Easter dinner. Fred and Sheila Merton and their adult children, Catherine, Dan, and Jenna, have gathered at their sizable home. Yes, it's called the mansion, where the siblings grew up. And the setting is beautifully pulled together. The flowers are great. Everything is absolutely beautiful. And the meal is being served by their longtime housekeeper, Irena, one of those people who's like, they always believe is in the house. She's always there. And each of the children has a relationship with her. The parents have a relationship with her, but she's not family. She's that close to family, but not family. So what should be a festive holiday is completely upset by Fred's pronouncement that he plans to sell the home, the one that the oldest daughter, Catherine, desperately wants. She wants this house. She wants everything in this house. And that's not the only slight. Recently, the other son, Dan, he's running into a little bit of money trouble, and he's selling the business that this kid was in line to inherit and run. So early in the evening, Dan begins to hint that he needs money, and he's blown off before his request can even be done. So Jenna has been chastised for her bohemian lifestyle, and the following night, the parents are brutally murdered. Either just found dead. What's going on? And I love when Shari drops in certain details that make readers question what they think they know about the crime, and it's all perfectly plausible. Blame shifts among the siblings, Irena, Fred's sister, who's been told she's getting half of his fortune, and some unexpected characters who also have reason to stake claim there to what's going on. Each time they make some progress, they are sent in another direction. So typically Shari's books are one-sit reads. This was totally the same thing with it. Plotting is brilliant, so enjoy Not a Happy Family. And then we've got a book that's set in a part of the world that I confess I do very little about, with Jane Harper writing The Survivors. I confess also, this is the first book of Jane Harper's that I've read, and everybody could not believe that I haven't read The Dry. And The Dry has been adapted into a film that people have been talking about. I think it's running. I don't know if it made theaters in the States, or you can watch it on some kind of a streaming. But everybody's been talking to me about this for years. And it brought me to a world I really wanted to travel to, especially during the pandemic when you weren't leaving the country. It's a fourth thriller, and it's set in Tasmania, and it braids a tragedy from decades ago with a recent one. Kieran Elliott and his wife are back in their hometown for a visit as his parents are ready to downsize following his father's diagnosis with Alzheimer's. And it's a small town where everyone knows each other and their secrets. Decades earlier, Kieran's brother and another friend died at sea in an incident that is blamed on him, which is the burden that he has carried for years. A young girl also perished in that same brutal storm. And after his arrival back in town, another girl is found dead on the beach. And this leads people to relive the past with all the questions and finger pointing that might one expect of people who are the survivors, the people who are there behind. Jane always chooses a setting very, very carefully as it drives her storytelling. And you can really feel that you're in Tasmania as you're reading this book, because it's very, very, she articulates that part of the world very, very well. Lots more in our book reporter talks to interview her with her about that. And next up, we've got The Husbands by Chandler Baker. Okay, this has got a really big premise. Many of you may know remember her from the Whisper Network, and I was looking forward to seeing what she did next. And there's a lot of talk in this country right now about the second shift. It's that women have two lives. They've got their wives that they have a job, and then they come home and they have a second shift where they work on the homework, what everybody's going to be eating for dinner, what the snacks are going to be, running the calendar for everybody and what's going on. And if women take on more of the management and running of the household that men do, even when they've got these incredibly busy jobs. So this book looks at this dead on. In it, Nora Spangler is a successful attorney whose home life is filled with taking care of a myriad of little details. It's the little things like when the doctor's appointments are going to happen, and who's going to be eating what for dinner, and who's allergic to what, and who's going to what birthday party, and where are they meeting. At the same time, she's trying to earn a partner status at her law firm. So she and her husband decide to go house hunting, and they go and they find this community called Dynasty Ranch. And when they're in Dynasty Ranch, there are women who are just as high powered as Nora, but they're not anywhere near as stressed. Their husbands help with everything. They ask what they can do and how they can do this. And they match their housekeeping skills and even often surpass what the wives do. At one point, this one man brings in this cheese platter and it's been completely curated by him. And like, whoa, look what you have your husband doing. So Nora kind of wonders what's going on with this property. She takes a case of wrongful death that happened in the community and uncovers a lot more of what's going on. It's a great ending to it. Do not read to that very last page. And as she did with the timely topic of sexual harassment in the workplace, here she addresses the husband of where working women are today and the cost of the second shift in the husbands. And we're talking about a time where there are many women who have left the workforce, young mothers especially have left the workforce simply because they can't handle the burden of what's going on with the second shift, especially when you don't know who's going to be home with COVID tomorrow, that you've got the whole class quarantined and now your child's sitting at home. So what are you going to do with them? And the next book is Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. I am a huge fan of Alice's books. She's an author who knows how to conquer a killer twist, but more importantly, she never makes you feel like you've been tricked. It makes you feel like, I should have seen that all along, but I wasn't tricked. Rock, Paper, Scissors, we have Mr. and Mrs. Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, not R-I-G-H-T, who are just perfect rye names for the lead characters. With names like this, really, what could go wrong? They're headed to Scotland for their idyllic getaway anniversary weekend. And immediately it feels like anything but. There's fog outside and the storm is brewing between them is just as strong as the fog that's eating up the roadway that they can't really see where they're going. You see, Adam and Amelia haven't been in a good place in the relationship for a while, but they're not admitting that to each other. Sure, they're talking about therapy, but no, more they're talking at it to each other. They're talking, oh, maybe we'll go to therapy, and maybe we're not going to go to therapy, blah, blah, blah. They're treating this adventure that they won in a contest like a wonderful escape to bring them closer together. It's what they need. You can hear their enthusiasm, as false that it is. So one thing about this couple that you need to know is that when Adam looks lovingly at his wife, he doesn't really know what he sees because he has face blindness, which renders him unable to recognize the face of the woman he loves. So it could be anybody. He could be talking to anybody, and it could be his wife. But each year on their anniversaries, Adam and Amelia exchange traditional gifts. Each year, Adam's wife writes him a letter that she does not share. It's something that she just holds on to, looking back at their year together and what has made it special. She plans to share these notes with him on this weekend. And after a harrowing drive, they arrive at a setting that's more creepy than special, and suddenly the spark poofs out of the celebration. Just what's going on? So got rock, paper, scissors. And what has that woman been writing all these years as they go to celebrate this anniversary? So next up, also knows how I'm terrified of this book. It's The Push. It's The Push, which is by Ashley Adrain. And let me just tell you that I will never look at little pink mittens the same way after reading this book. And people in my book club read it and they said they stayed up night, worried about this, worried about the book and what happens in it. In it, Blythe is a new mother. She and her husband, Fox, were happy newlyweds, and she's so excited about becoming a mother. However, once her daughter is born, she sees this a lot less wonderful than she hoped for. Her own mother and grandmother were not role models, and each had different strains of mental illness. The ramifications of their issues made it really tough for her when she was growing up. She's determined to be the perfect mother for her daughter, but she feels there's something wrong with baby Violet. That Violet is the color of this cover. Got a violet, okay? But with baby Violet, only she sees these actions. Her husband sees none of these behaviors, and she begins to question herself. And Blythe has a son, and with him, she feels this warm, fabulous childhood. This child is like, clinging to her and happy to be with her. And she says, maybe this is what motherhood is about. The book is then something unexpected happens to shatter their world. I'm not going to say any more, except the book is written in the second person as Blythe speaks to Fox and tries to share with him her anxieties. So the book opens, we're looking through a window and seeing her husband and daughter. Like, why is she outside where they are? And that's the push. Slim novel, but don't read it at night, seriously. And another one that's going to be talking about families is The Photographer by Mary Dix Carter. Delta Dawn, do you love that name? Delta Dawn, what's the song? Delta Dawn, blah, 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 who photographs the birthday parties of children who come from privileged families. Not only does she shoot the parties, she manipulates the images to ensure that everyone looks happy and smiling. Yes, folks, it doesn't just happen on Instagram. Wealthy people redo the parties. They're going to end up in their photo albums to make sure everyone looks happy. So the party at the Straub home, she likes what she sees a lot. And then she insinuates herself into the family's lives. However, as you might expect, she's got a ton of issues. Readers spend a lot of time inside her head, and that's one of very dark thoughts. But at the same time, there's a lot of social commentary to be discussed about who needs a professional photographer at a child's birthday party. Let's just start with there. And the use of Photoshop and how she uses Photoshop in this book. So total escape read, kind of thing we all need these days. And you may well think about, the photographer should take pictures this holiday season. Next up, we've got The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jewell. Lisa always writes one of these books where she's got a little crack of something at the beginning, something that gets her started thinking about the book. And here it was a sign that said, dig here. I think that's the beginning of the story. She's like, no, Carol, that's not it. It's about what happens at a posh boarding school. And she said she's always wanted to write about one of those places where everyone has come together and everybody's super, super wealthy. But what about the kid in town who's not that way? And she's getting to attend that school, perhaps as a scholarship student. So Tallulah is an unwed mother who's crazy about her son, and she lives with her mom, Chris. A day student in the late 30s, she happily helps out with childcare for Noah. And Noah's dad, Zach, is still on the scene, but Tallulah's not sure she wants him to be. She's not sure she wants him around. She loves spending time at home and with the wild bunch she sees at school. They include Scarlett, a really troubled girl from a family who lives in a sprawling mansion called the Dark Place. It's got a swimming pool and all the kind of fun things that you want to hang out and do. So one evening, Tallulah and Zach, the guy she's not so sure about, head out for the night on the town, leaving Kim home with Noah, the baby. And they don't return. It's very out of character because they normally wouldn't do that. Tallulah is devoted to Noah. So what did she do? She's been giving clear signs that she doesn't want Zach to have a strong place in the life. What's going on? And years later, a mystery book author named Sophie moves to town with her boyfriend, takes a job as a head teacher at this boarding school. She goes out for a walk and she sees a sign that says, dig here. And from there, the story takes on a totally different turn of what's going on. Storytelling's brisk and sharp. It's have fun seeing what you do and don't do and try and get it right. Next, from Paula Hawkins, we've got A Slow Fire Burning. I confess I did love A Girl on the Train. I confess I was really disappointed in Into the Water. And the more I read in this book, the more I realized how she's back ratcheting up her game with A Slow Fire Burning. It's full of moments that you're not really sure who killed Daniel on the houseboat. But then you get an equally plausible character put in front of you. Who is the culprit? There's a girl named Laura that's seen running away with blood on her shirt. Miriam saw it all from the houseboat across the dock and is happy to tell her story to any investigator who will listen. And she's quite a storyteller. Later on, you'll see just how good. And then their relatives who could be involved, like Daniel and Carla. What does she know about his death? What does she do? And let's toss in Carla's husband, Theo, the novelist, who has his own fingerprints on the table. So here we go. There are times when you might just get lost in the read. The book demands careful attention. And while you've been torn in so many different directions, the ending is super satisfying and it's going to bring closure. At least it did for me. So there you've got A Slough Fire Burning.
And the next book on the list brings up a lot about Chicago that you never hear about. So, Carol, why don't you talk about Clark and Division?
Yeah, Clark and Division was, okay, so I knew that many Japanese people were put in internment camps in California at the onset of our entering into World War II after Pearl Harbor. I knew that. I assumed that people stayed in those camps until the war was over, and then they went back to wherever they lived before. No idea that this book is set in Chicago, where a number of people were moved after they were in the camps in California. And so it's set in the early 40s as a Japanese family is resettled there after spending time in the California camp. And the title refers to two streets at the crossroads, Clark and Division, in the city where the family lives. And it's told through the eyes of Ako Ito, and readers get a strong sense of place as well as the story, because Aki and her family arrive in Chicago to learn their sister Rose, who had gone there ahead of them, has died. And Aki's like, what happened to her? Like, how could she have died? Was she pushed on the subway in this accident, or was it a suicide? And the latter kind of seems kind of unfathomable to her, because that's not what her sister would do. So she takes it on herself to defend her sister's honor and learn what happened, all the time juggling her parents' readjustment to Chicago, where they really are not finding their way super easily. Her father had run a store where he was before. He doesn't have that station in life anymore. And while I knew about these camps, I didn't know about these people moving to the Midwest without any of their belongings, or being able to give any kind of a place of their own that they can feel like is their own. This book will have you wanting to research that migration more, as well as contemplate the tolls that these moves had on these families. So while this is a thriller, it's also historical fiction at the same time, because you're also seeing a lot of what happened to that in time and place there.
All right, the next two books on this list are thrillers that have to do with the publishing industry, which we know a lot about because we work side by side with them. So
I love both of them. And it was so interesting to see how they handled what happens in publishing, because, we have a little insider view of what's going on, and it gets shared with readers here. So in the plot by Jean Hamp Corliss, which was just so well done, we've got a guy named Jacob Fitch Bonner. And he had some middling success with the book, but he hasn't had a hit since then. And now he's teaching at a fourth rate, I didn't know such things existed, MFA program. And while he's there, he's got this student who has written a plot that really sounds great. And the guy is really full of himself. His name's Evan Parker. In fact, he's already decided that when he gets published, because he's sure he's going to make his name Parker Evan. And the plot of the book sounds really good. It really sounds terrific. But it's like, wait, who is this guy? And, is he really going to get published, and what's going to happen? So years go by, and we've got Jacob, who really still hasn't had a success. And all of a sudden he thinks about that plot and what happened to that guy, and the guy is dead. So now he's going to usurp this guy's a plot for a book and write it. So what he does is he writes this book, and it becomes a big success. And then all of a sudden he gets a note from somebody that tells him that you're a thief. You've actually stolen the work, because they know about Evan and they know about the other book. So the original book. So once again, he's trying to figure out, who is this person? What do they know about me? And the book is layered in with all kinds of fun things about publishing, including going on a book tour, what it's like dealing with fans. It's just a romp about that kind of the publishing world. But at the same time, you've got this guy wondering, who knows what about him and how did they find it out? And where's the connection going on with this? It's completely well done. I really look forward to seeing her next book, which I know is coming out in the spring. Jean's been an author that I've enjoyed reading for years, and this is, I really think, her best work. So there's the plot. And then we've got Who is Maud Dixon by Alexandra Andrews. And this book is another one that takes a look at somebody's going to take up the mantle of who somebody else is. in this book, Maud Dixon has written this hit book, and everybody, it's definitely a pseudonym, and no one knows who Maud Dixon is. So we've got our protagonist who is working at a publishing house. Her name is Florence Darrow. And Florence is working at a publishing house, and she's got one of those low-level assistant jobs, and she is let go, and she can't figure out what she's going to do next. And then she sees an ad to become an assistant to Maud Dixon. And she goes to take this job where you have to sign an NDA, and you can't talk about who Maud is at all, cannot be revealed. And she does odd things for Maud, who's a little offbeat herself. And then the two of them go to do a research trip for one of the books. And from there, well, I'm not going to tell you anymore, but there it gets really, really crazy. So there is who is Maud Dixon. So in both books, we've got people that have taken over new identities, and it's definitely fun to see how both of them play through.
And next up is a friend of the podcast, somebody who has been on a few times, and everything he says is really, really interesting. His, every book that comes out is just one after the next, better than the one that came before.
So here we've got Linwood Barclay, and his book is Find You First. So here we've got an executive tech millionaire named Miles Cookson. And Miles has been just diagnosed with a disease that is probably going to kill him. And it's also genetically be able to be passed along. And as a result, though he doesn't have any children, he was a sperm donor years ago. And he wants to find the children that could have been spawned by a sperm. So he has this list, and he's going and trying to find people. And as he's doing this, as he shows up to find people, they're dead. So who is on the track of trying to find out these people at the same time that he is going out to look for them? And he's got one girl that has said, I really think you're my dad. She's been looking for her father at the same time. And the two of them team up to try to figure out what's going on and who's out to find the people first. It's really a quick read. It's a brisk read. Once again, he's got some tie-ins to some political and social commentary of what's happening in the time that is layered into the book as well. So it's Find You First is like, okay, who's going to get to them first and what's really going on here? And it's got a super satisfying ending and a really fun romp of something that happens, sort of towards the end. You'll have to read to find it out.
Next up is The Last Mona Lisa.
Yeah, so Last Mona Lisa is by Jonathan Santlifer, and I've been waiting for a new thriller book from him for a long time. He wrote a fabulous memoir a couple of years ago called The Widower's Notebook that was a Bets on selection. But here, he's got this book that takes into the art world. Jonathan is an artist in addition to being a writer. And as a result, when he sits and writes about the art world, he's writing with some kind of authority because he's been there. So we know that the Mona Lisa was stolen years ago out of the Louvre. Do we know if the right painting is there now? How many copies were made? Where are they? So here we have a character named Luke, who is a descendant of the thief. And he's out to figure out, is the real painting back in the Louvre, and what is going on? And he goes on a chase of his own to find out what's going on with this painting. It's such a fun book because it's a look inside the art world. It's a world that most of us don't know that much about, but Jonathan does. So when he takes us there, we really feel like we're inside. He's also working on a follow-up book to this, which makes me really excited. He's actually sitting up at Yaddo working. He keeps putting up pictures on social media of his desk and what he's working on. So we're looking forward to seeing the follow-up book to this as well.
Now, the next book on the list is one that you're not going to want to read on an airplane. You're going to think about it anytime you're on an airplane, and maybe wait until after the holidays when you're done traveling to pick this one up. It is Falling.
It's Falling by T.J. Newman. I love this cover. I'm absolutely crazy about this book. And when this book came out, my son was heading out on a plane. I said, "You want to take this one with you?" He goes, "Nah, that's not something I want to think about." So here's the premise. We've got a pilot that gets on a plane, and he's told that either he crashes the plane or his family dies. There's the answer. It's like one of those two things. You pick what's going to happen. And the pilot is trying to figure out, like, is this real? If this is real, which it feels very, very real, anything that's going to impact your family, what is going to happen? And TJ is a former flight attendant, and she has spent a lot of time in the air. In fact, TJ wrote a lot of this book on cocktail napkins and little pieces of paper when she was flying for Alaska Airlines, and she was on the red-eye trips, because everybody would be asleep in the cabin, and she would be scrolling notes about things that she thought, things that she heard. And the premise of the book actually came when she was knocking around ideas, and she said to a pilot, what would happen if you were given this kind of a note? And the look on his face told her she had the makings of a really good novel. So she played around with this for years, came up with the story that's here in Falling, and it's just so well done. There's members of the crew that come into the story, and the way their backstories and their stories work into this as well. It's just a quick, brisk read. Yeah, you could read it while you're flying on that overnight flight if you just turn your light on above you. So there we've got Falling by TJ Newman.
Next on the list is The Fiancée.
The Fiancée is by Kate White. Kate's somebody I've known for years. In fact, we worked together years ago at Mademoiselle magazine before she went on and worked at Cosmo and a number of other books as well. And she's got this real knack for writing mysteries and thrillers that will get you right into these characters, because she writes character extremely well. So here we've got a family that's they're going for their annual outing where everyone gathers over the summer at a beautiful multi-acre estate where they're going to be having a couple of days of hanging out together. And as soon as they get there, our protagonist looks across the table and looks at the woman that's dating one of the brothers. And she knows this woman. She's been in acting classes with her. And she turns around to her and says, hey, I remember you then. And the fiance turns around and goes, or the woman that's the girlfriend at the time going to become the fiance says, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen you before. And she knows that she's seen this person before. She knows that she's lying. She knows that she's been in like rooms with her, and she can actually remember the actual acting that she did, the actual skit that she put through. And she's just perplexed on why is this woman not admitting who she is? Well, then a member of the family is found dead. And all of a sudden, all points go all over the place of who did this, how did this woman die, and what happened from there. And we're chasing little clues all along the way of what could have happened, what might have happened. And each person gets put into different scenarios where they could have been the person who did it. And at the same time, we're trying to find out, who is this woman who's the fiance? Is she telling the truth? And what role does she have in everything that went down that weekend? So The Fiancée by Kate White.
And the next on the list is perfect for Christmas. It's got a Christmas setting. It'll really bring you back to when you were in Catholic school. It is The Last Commandment.
Here is The Last Commandment. It's by Scott Shepherd. And this book is actually set in New York City during the Christmas season. And I immediately remembered every single thing that was crazy about that time: the tree lighting, the traffic that you would sit in for hours, like you'd get in a cab and think you were going to go someplace. And no, the subway would have been so much faster. Austin's right. This is a test of what you remember from Catholic school. And Sister Adrienne, I remember nothing because I couldn't do the commandments in order. I was having to follow them here in the book. So here we've got the Last Commandment. And what we've got is there's a set of killings that are happening in London. And as these killings are happening, there's a commander that's out and he's actually getting ready to retire on January 1st. And the commander is now going out to help figure out what happened, where all these murders, what's tying them together, who is there a serial killer on the loose, what's going on. And all of a sudden they get a clue that ties them into one of the murders is going to happen in New York. And all of a sudden he jumps on a plane and spend some time running around the city in New York, which you can't do that easily during the holidays. And this book reminds me of everything about New York during the holidays, being stuck in traffic. The places that he stayed were a block away from where our office was in the city. It's the tree. It's trying to get around and try and solve a mystery where lives are at stake, but at the same time, the holidays are unfolding all around you. And also brought into this is his estranged daughter. She's been away out of his life for a while. His wife passed away a year before. And as well, Christmas is like a really rough time for him. And his daughter has been estranged, and yet she's a reporter. And all of a sudden she's into this whole scenario as well. And she's trying to figure out clues of what's going on as well. We're going to race through the commandments here, people. It will be like your sister Adrian's makeup class after school. And at the same time, you're going to have a real satisfying ending of what really happens when the 10 commandments unfold. Scott's working on his next book, which is going to be opening in Hawaii. So a little bit different setting next time. By that time, our commander will have been, he will have retired from Scotland Yard. Austin Grant will not be there anymore, but he will still be on the road going out to solve mysteries. And this time his daughter's going to be on the trail with him as well. So here we've got The Last Commandment.
The next book on the list is Sally Hepworth's. And Carol, you've been a fan of Sally Hepworth since her first book. From the interview, she talked about how The Good Sister was inspired by her children, right?
Yes, exactly. She looked out in the backyard and her two children were out there playing, and the younger one bit the older one. And she ran outside and she was like really chastising the younger one about what she'd done. And the older one looks and she goes, "No, mommy, don't do that to my baby sister." And she says, "Oh, this is such a loving moment. Like, she's being so kind towards her sister." She turns around and she says, "I'll get her back later when she least expects it." So all of a sudden she says, "There's an idea for the book." So in here, we've got two sisters. One lives a very regimented life. She likes to sit at certain places at the table. She follows routines. She eats certain foods. Yeah, she's somewhere on the spectrum that we don't really bring that up. And at the same time, she has a sister who's really taken care of her whole life. So the sister who has been so good to her all these years finds out she can't have a baby. She's not fertile. This is what's going on. And all of a sudden, the other sister says, "What can I do for my sister who's been so good to me all this time? I can have a baby for her." But she doesn't have a man in her life, and she's going to try to figure out how to make this happen. But at the same time, we're going to find out who is really the good sister in this whole story. Sally's writing is brisk. She takes you along on a ride. And once again, she totally engages me from page one. And I just see her smile and that twinkle in her eye as she's sitting and writing these books as well. So here we've got The Good Sister.
Next up, we have another author that was on the Book Reporter Talks To, Nicole Baart.
Nicole Baart's book is set in a small town in Iowa, and Nicole lives in a small town in Iowa as well. So you know that she's got some understanding of the people in the place there. So we've got a woman named Juniper, and she's been away for many, many years. She's been out of the town. She raced out when she was about 19 or 20 years old, and she's come back now because the woman who runs the library needs some help, and she's going to come back to help her. And at the same time, she's learned that her brother is once again a suspect in a murder that happened right before she left town. And she feels like she's got to get back there and try and vindicate her brother and really tell the truth about what's gone on. And she's also heard there's a podcast that's digging deep into the story. And the last thing she wants to do is have her family be any part of this whatsoever. So she comes back and, oh yeah, she also has a daughter that she left behind. Daughter that's been raised by her parents and is now a teenager and is sort of not really happy her mom's back in town. But her mom's there and they're going to try and fix things between each other. At least Juniper wants to, but it's really not working out. And at the same time, she's seeing all these other people that she grew up with in town. And all of a sudden, what happened that night is going to spin in a completely different direction. This book's a slow burn. Beginning is really, really slow. And you're just moving in and you're getting to know all the characters. And then bam, at the end, everything comes together and you see like the way it all clicks into place. So, and there you've got Everything We Didn't Say by Nicole Baart.
Now, the next book on the list was the biggest thriller of the past year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this book has been on the list. I just checked today for 30 weeks. It's been on the New York Times list. And here's a really crazy thing. The last thing you told me is not the book that Laura Dave was supposed to be writing. She's supposed to be writing another book, which was one of her women's fiction titles that were always wonderful to read. But she had the story that was burning in the back of her head. And she just thought about, well, remember when the Enron crisis happened and the wife said she didn't know anything? How could she really know nothing? And that plagued her for years. And she started playing around with the story and a plot of, what could have happened? How could this have really happened to this person? So Laura's doing here is the first time she's done a thriller. And she actually calls her editor at one point and says, I just want you to know, the book you think I'm going to write, I'd really like to write a thriller instead. And thank God her editor, Mary Sue Root, she said, okay, go ahead and do it. Even though the editor at that point is kind of biting her nails going, oh my gosh, what is this going to be? She's never headed in this direction. So in this book, she puts a wife into that exact scenario. She's living out on a houseboat. They recently married to her husband, and she's got a stepdaughter that really doesn't want much to do with her. And one day she's comes home from work, and there's a note that arrives. A girl knocks on the door and says, protect her. And she's like, protect her? Like, what does that mean? And all of a sudden she's realizing, well, the only person he could be referring to is his daughter, because he all of a sudden has gone missing, because the software company that he's working for is under heavy indictment about what they've been doing and what has really been going on there. So all of a sudden she is thrown in the spotlight of what's going on. The FBI ends up at her house. She's in this moment where she realizes she knows nothing. She has no idea what's gone on with the situation. And yeah, she's that wife, the Enron wife of there's this whole thing that's being laid out, and she really doesn't know anything to do with it. But she does have those words, protect her. And now she's on the run with this girl that really wants nothing to do with her. And she's on the run to try to figure out what's happened here and try to figure out really, like, who is this guy that she married, and what does she know and what doesn't she know about him? And there's a fabulous scene towards the end of this book that will just make you go, whoa, aha, we're completely nailed it. As you're reading, you're not going to think that this is Laura's first book at all, first thriller at all. And she's also adapting this book for Reese Witherspoon for Apple TV with her husband, Josh Singer, who won the Academy Award for writing Spotlight. So the two of them, she's talked to us during our interview about what the writing process is like, about writing that first episode and which other episodes you write along the way, sort of moving the story along. And it's going to be starring Jennifer Garner. And I'm not sure what the air date's going to be, but keep tuned to the site because we'll definitely have that. Laura, we're looking forward to another thriller from her because she's got that pacing, she's got that style. And seriously, folks, 30 weeks on the New York Times list with a thriller that was her first foray out there. Really nice to see.
We're going to take a step away from thrillers, and we're going to go to a memoir, which is the final Bets On selection of the year. If you haven't seen it yet, big surprise, it is Going There by Katie Couric.
So here we've got Going There by Katie Couric. Now, years ago, when I first got out of school, I thought it'd be great to be a host on the Today Show. Barbara Walters was the host at the time. And I thought this would be a perfect job for me. I could get on, talk to all these people, have all these interesting conversations, travel the world. And then I realized one of the things you'd have to do at the job is get up at 3:45 in the morning. And oh man, that did nothing for me, because usually I'm the night owl. I prefer to go to bed at 3:45 in the morning. So this, I realized, was not going to do the job for me, and took my career in different directions. But I was always really wondering about that TV world and what it was like to be on the other side of the camera and to see what really happens there. And Katie really goes there in this book. She talks about her years where she worked on the Today Show. She talks about her years where she moved over to CBS and she worked on 60 Minutes, and she was the anchor of the CBS Evening News. And she doesn't pull any punches about what this time was like and what it was like to be on camera, but also what was happening behind the scenes. What was happening when you weren't reading off that teleprompter? What was happening sitting on the couch with the people beside you? Yeah, she touches on what happened with Matt Lauer, but that's really not where the book is, where the whole story is. It's a lot about what happened through the years of the push and pull of producers who wanted to be a big part of big successes. It's part of what you had to do as a person who was on air to truly try to get the story. The moment she sat down with Sarah Palin and what she got as a big get there. The time she was in the Blue Room with the Bushes, and she was supposed to be talking to Barbara, but she wanted to get a question out to the president and how she got that done. And it's really how it was always a scramble of what to do at every single moment. There was no moment of being just calm and sitting on the couch, because you were always trying to anticipate the next thing was happening. And that's also a very personal story. She talks about her life. She talks about her life as she was growing up. She talks about her being the first years that she was working, the years where she met her husband and she had a wonderful life with him, had 2 daughters, and then the tragedy of when he passed away suddenly from colon cancer, and where that brought her on a drive to make sure that push for colon cancer awareness People who are longtime watchers of the Today Show remember the time she had a colonoscopy on screen, so people could see how easy it was to do something like that. But it's also very honest here about how her life was so tough at those times, because for a long time her husband was in Washington, she was in New York, and how she relied on a housekeeper to keep her life running, and how time with her family was so important to her, and then how she became a single mom and relationships she had on the way after that. She goes there and she's very, very honest about everything that she talks about. And no matter what you thought about Katie Couric through the years, I'd say that you're going to find something new when you sit and read this book. So there's going there, my 44th pick of the year. And believe me, going down to the end of what was going to be 44 was a big thought to me. I wanted something that would be where somebody's going to win all 44 books. We wanted to be able to have 11 people win 4 copies of the books. So it was a little math going into this at the end. And was I going to do 45? And really at the beginning of the year, we never go into this knowing how many books I'm going to select. And what I'm really happy with is, as I went back, and yes, I've stumbled over some of these plots, because let me tell you, some people, this has been a lot of reading through the year. At the same time, I remember these books, and I remember whose hand I would put them in and recommend them to. So many times when I was book group, these are the books that I was talking about and saying, these are the books we were either going to discuss, or the books that I was just saying, these are the ones you want to take a look at. So I've so enjoyed sharing my 44 bets on with you. I've already got some lined up for next year. I've already read some that I am completely crazy about, and I've got others on the shelf that I'm spying and I'm saying, I think you're going to be a bets on as well.
It's great to have these recommendations again at the end of the year, looking back and seeing the books that you might have missed over that time period. And you do such a great job talking about them.
Well, I feel like I've done a top line job on a lot of books, because I remember there was a man or a woman, but I'm not really remembering their names. So here's what I'm going to recommend to everybody. Go to my Book Reporter Bets on selections, because those are the ones that I wrote right after I read the book. And from there, you'll be able to see even a little bit more in depth besides what I talked about today. And those selections are, well, I write about them right after I've read the book. So there's a lot more detail there.
And if you'd like to see more videos from us, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment on a book that you thought might have been missing that we can check out.
So thanks for joining us once again for a Bookachino Live event, and wishing you a happy holiday season and all best for 2022.